Hello, and I welcome you all to JNF. I'm your host, Vikrant. We're covering three stories in this episode. First, China is putting the brakes on Europe's military dreams, and India is preparing to help Russia deal with its fuel shortage. And together, Beijing and Delhi may be giving Moscow breathing space at a difficult time. Yes, it is a difficult time for Russia. We have to acknowledge that. Then we will talk about Zelensky. He is celebrating drone attacks deep inside Russia, and now he is openly admitting that the G7 is helping him raise the pressure on Putin. I see this as Zelensky's open challenge to Putin. He is talking about preemptive strikes. Question is, can Putin stop him? And G7? Time will tell. And in the end, India may reopen the Iran oil route. That could hurt Gulf exporters, strengthen Iran, and give Delhi a bigger stick in West Asia or the Middle East. Let's begin, my friends. Russia is facing a difficult phase at home. But before I begin, I know that it is fashion for some people to dismiss any anti-Russia story or any story that gives a bad impression of Russia's position as mere propaganda. Oh, it is propaganda. Some people tell me, Vikrant, you are reading Newsweek these days. Believe me, my list of my sources and those websites, it is exactly the same that it was on day one of the war. It is just that I cannot filter out inconvenient news for you. Those people who question my integrity, I urge you to put your blinkers away. If you seek news, then be ready for some inconvenient developments. But if you seek entertainment in the name of news, you are free to stick to those platforms loved by Moscow officials. You are free to watch RT. I always say, my friends, always watch CNN, Fox News, and RT, all of these channels, because no side is presenting you with the whole truth. Every side is giving you their version of the story. If you watch all of them, then you will be able to use your mind, your common sense, and to arrive at some conclusion. So please decide yourself, but watch all of them. This is my mantra, and this is what I believe in. You should not be influenced by somebody's opinion. Just watch what everybody is saying and make a sense of it. Now let's go back to Russia. So there are two major problems as I can see. The first is, of course, Ukraine's drone campaign. It is getting more successful day by day. The second is the ensuing fuel shortage caused by attacks on key energy facilities inside Russia. Now, even Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak, he said on Tuesday that Russia is considering a diesel export ban. Things are serious. And he is the Deputy Prime Minister. He's not some Kiev propagandist, okay? Now, Russia has already banned exports of gasoline and jet fuel. Again, it shows that there is a problem. Russian oil exports are also down by 15% in the first half of June compared to first half of May. So yes, Moscow is under pressure, but this is where China and India are stepping in. They're trying to help their ally, Russia. And this is why I believe the West should not start celebrating too early. Premature celebration, right? Zelensky is infamous for doing that, premature celebration and also other things. Because while Europe is dreaming of a giant military buildup, China is quietly holding the material keys to that dream. The EU wants more drones, more factories. Brussels wants to turn Europe into a giant defense showroom. But there is one problem. China. Europe's plans to boost its defense capacity are being slowed by the Chinese export controls and sales restrictions on critical raw materials. And Brussels is now calling on countries and companies to diversify supply chains. Well, that sounds very confident on paper, but Europe has been saying this for years. Every time there is a crisis, Brussels discovers that it depends on someone else. First, it was Russian gas, then Chinese supply chains, then American weapons, and then American security guarantees. Everything is outsourced. For 17 out of 34 materials classified as critical by the EU, China controls at least 70% of global mining or refining. And now China has placed 8 of those 34 materials on its export control list. And this is a serious blow for Europe's military production. Drones need advanced parts. Military electronics need rare materials. Without them, production slows. And when drone production slows, Ukraine's ability to keep launching attacks also slows. This matters because Kiev's drone campaign depends heavily on Western supply chains. The EU may talk loudly about supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes, but Beijing can quietly make that support much more expensive and much slower. That's the main part. The best part is that Brussels cannot do much about it. 2 years back, the EU introduced the European Critical Raw Materials Act. The idea was to rebuild domestic supply chains for minerals. And Europeans, they set 2030 targets for extraction, processing, and recycling the rare materials. It also said that no single outside supplier should account for more than 65% of its supply. So it was a very nice plan actually. But then comes the problem. The targets are not binding. A 3 billion euro fund was also launched last year to speed up these projects. But the European Court of Auditors has noted that the bloc remains far from meeting those 2030 goals. So Europe has speeches, Europe has the fund, but China has the minerals. That's the problem. You can guess who is more relaxed right now, the Chinese or the Europeans. This Chinese move could slow Europe's drone output, and if that happens, this can directly affect the scale of Ukraine's drone attacks on Russia. Although it may take some time, some weeks, some months to reflect the real impact of China's move in Ukraine. Now let's move to India. India is set to export large amounts of gasoline to Russia to help stabilize its domestic energy market. As per Russian agency data, it is very important to look at this data, my friends. A 25% drop in manufacturing has led to a supply gap equal to 20%. Yes, 20% of domestic consumption. So if you look at data, Russia needs around 110,000 tons of gasoline every day during summers. But remaining operational refineries, they are producing only around 85,000 tons every day. That means Russia is facing a daily shortfall of 25,000 tons. And if you look at Crimea, Crimea is under intense pressure, my friends. Now, for 4 days, motorists have struggled to find gasoline at petrol pumps. At peak hours, taxis are crowded. People are not able to move. Even private carriers don't have enough fuel. Some long routes may even be cancelled. Power outages have also started in Crimea. Cafes and shops quickly brought out their generators, but generators also need fuel. That's the problem. That brings us back to the same problem. Where does the fuel come from? And in Crimea, tourism is also being hit. People are cancelling their trips. The sea is warm, the beaches are there, but tourists are missing. A holiday with no fuel, power cuts, and uncertain transport was not something Crimeans were expecting to see this year. It is still unclear whether Indian gasoline supplies will go to Crimea or other Russian regions. Well, amid all this, I want to make one thing clear, my friends. If you look at history, if you look at past 4 years, Russia has faced setbacks before as well, and Russia has shown that it can recover. After a brief pause in January, for example, Ukraine resumed large-scale strikes in March. The early focus of the Ukrainians was on export infrastructure. And if you remember, there were strikes on facilities in the Baltic port of Ust-Luga, and that temporarily stopped shipments for 2 weeks. In that time, 16 of the terminal's 54 storage tanks were hit badly, and 5 suffered severe damage. Then, similar attacks at the Grushovaya oil depot serving the Novorossiysk port damaged 14 tanks and destroyed 5. But Russian exports proved far more resilient than many expected. Tanker departures from Baltic and Black Sea ports fell by half during the most intense attack period, but they recovered quickly. By the second half of April, Russia's seaborne crude exports had reached around 3.8 million barrels per day, and that was impressive. So Russians were hit badly, but they recovered very fast. It showed that Russia can take a hit, adapt, and restore flows quickly. This is why I would not write off Russia completely. Of course, nobody can. Moscow knows how to fight back. And with support from allies, I hope that Russia may emerge stronger from this difficult phase. Now, while Russia is dealing with these pressures, Zelensky is of course celebrating. In India, it is often said that every dog has their day. He has vowed to double down now. Zelensky said Ukraine will now carry out preemptive strikes. That's a big claim. That's a big challenge actually for Putin. It's an open challenge. He's saying that I will carry out preemptive strikes on facilities that Russia uses to expand its war effort. And I quote him, in his evening address, Zelensky said, I instructed our intelligence services and military to act preemptively against facilities Russia uses to expand its war effort. This is where things become very revealing. In the same address, Zelensky also said that he was getting open support from G7 countries. He's openly linking these attacks to talks with G7 leaders. He said that if Kiev receives what was discussed in the G7 meeting, Ukraine can quickly create conditions in which Russia is forced to choose peace. I quote him again, we very much count on a positive response from our partners. They clearly know what this is about. That line is worth noticing. They know what this is about. Of course they do, because they are a part of it. Zelensky is openly saying that G7 support is helping Ukraine carry out deeper and more damaging attacks inside Russia. In my view, he is here daring Putin to widen the target list. He is telling Moscow that look, G7 is behind me. G7 is directly involved, and he is betting that Russia will not respond against them. Well, that's a risky game, I should say. Ukraine is planning to strike up to 3,000 kilometers inside Russia starting next year, of course with American support. This is something that the Z bloggers are reporting, and that would put more pressure on Russian air defenses in the coming year. The biggest concern for Moscow is attacks inside the capital. An attack in Moscow carries political weight. It affects public confidence. It raises questions around the Kremlin's ability to protect the country. Russian officials are now pulling more air defense systems toward Moscow, Valdai, and the Kerch Bridge. That means other regions may get less protection. But we should not forget one thing, my friends. The real war is still happening on the front lines. That is where Russia remains far stronger than Ukraine. Russian forces have pushed 15 kilometers into Ukraine's defenses in the Sumy region. That is a big development happening on the front lines. So we should not forget that the war is going on there too. Russia is expected to increase pressure on the front lines in the coming days. I'm also learning that Russia may expand the front line by 150 to 200 kilometers. That can put pressure on Ukraine forces. So Zelensky can celebrate drone videos, he can celebrate explosions, he can celebrate social media clips. Wars are won by territory, manpower, supply lines, and control on the ground in the long run. And this is where Russia still remains a dominant force. That is something you cannot ignore. Now let's move to India and Iran. And this is good news for Iran. It is also a warning to Gulf countries. India has now opened talks with Iran to buy oil. Iran and India discussed stronger energy cooperation and trade during a meeting between their oil ministers on the sidelines of a BRICS energy ministers gathering in India. India was once a major buyer of Iranian crude, but it stopped imports in 2019 after American sanctions were imposed on Iranian oil exports. Washington told India to stop buying, and India stopped. But times have changed, of course, thanks to the American war on Iran. India is now also buying Russian oil in record volumes. Russia's share of India's crude imports climbed to 52.5% in the first 20 days of June. That is up from 41.7% in May. The gains have come at the expense of India's Gulf suppliers. Saudi Arabia's share has dropped sharply. It fell to just 4.2% in June from nearly 21% in February, before the war in West Asia broke out. Kuwait, Qatar, and Iraq once accounted for more than 30% of India's imports in January. Now their combined share has effectively dropped to zero. India is importing nothing from Qatar, from Kuwait, and Iraq now. That should worry Gulf capitals. India is reducing dependence on them. Russia is filling a huge part of the gap, and now Iran may also return as an oil supplier. This gives Delhi more options, and when a country has more options, it has more power. And sources in New Delhi say that India can use trade with Iran as leverage against Gulf nations, especially if those Gulf nations continue deepening their security ties with Pakistan. This is a message that Gulf countries cannot ignore. My friends, that is all in this episode of GNF. Thank you once again for joining today.